for March. Can I ask, when you speak, can you give your name, please, and same for officers, so because we are live. First item is apologies.
We've had apologies from Councillor Francis Taylor and Laura Jones.
Thank you. Declarations of interest? As and when? Right. Public open forum? None. To receive the minutes of the meeting held on Monday the 15th of January. Somebody move them? Move? Right. Right. Number 5 is to receive the information, the final independent remuneration panel, report 2018-2019.
It's just the final report. We received the draft report back in October. It was open for consultation. This is just the final report that sets out what the determinations are for 2018-19. No major change. I don't think there's any changes from the draft report that went out. In terms of the differences between last year and this year, they've taken away the different bands for chairs and they've taken away the different bands for cabinet members as well. Otherwise, it's as is. Unless there's any questions, that'll go to council now in May, and it'll be the remuneration for next year.
Is there any questions from the members? No. One question I'd like to ask. You say they've taken away from the chairs. Does that mean the chairs are no longer going to get any payment?
No. Chairs will still receive payments, but currently there's 2 different bands that chairs can receive, depending on how the council has allocated that chair within it. Next year, the 2 bands will be done away with, and if you're a chair, you'll be paid the same rate regardless.
Right, thank you. Right, the next one then is back to you, John. Number 6, the council diary. Can I say before you start, you've put a lot of information into that, and there's other meetings and outside bodies are in there as well, which we haven't seen before, which is helpful.
Yeah, we try to include, I mean, legally we shouldn't be including outside bodies and things like that because it's not for us as a council to determine the dates, but members have asked for that information. So it's in there with a caveat in the report that there's some things in there that we're not obviously going to be having any control over or making a decision on. The draft diary is there for any comments. If you've got any, obviously ask me in a minute. We've tried to block out school holidays as requested. Sometimes that's just not possible. For example, I think it was around July time, prior to the August recess. School holidays start the week before. We just need to get some meetings in before the August recess to make sure that we can have all the meetings that we need to hold. But again, if you've got any comments, I'm happy to have them, and we'll amend that in the final report that goes to council in April for them to approve the diary.
Yes, Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. Sheila Woodhouse. Just an observation really along the lines of what you're discussing, term times. Could you please keep to term times for officers as well as members? It is very, very difficult when meetings fall in school holidays for people to make arrangements for childcare, etc. I know there are obviously exceptional cases, but the Welsh Assembly and Westminster do their best to stick to this policy as well, if we can make that a policy. Thank you.
On the diary, the school holidays are greyed out. So that's when the school holidays are. Like I say, there's 1 or 2 meetings where we've had to put them in depending on the time they fall within the year. But half terms, I think we've blocked out completely. It's just where they fall, where we've got August recess. We have to have a council meeting before the end of August. That's when it best sits. So again, any comments, I'm happy to have them, and we'll see if we can amend the diary that goes to council in April.
Yes.
Thank you, Chair. I know I'm not a member of the committee, so thank you for letting me speak. Just on because I'm concerned about them being in on the summer holidays, as you know. I just wondered, on that 26th, where we've got a full council meeting in July, would there be any chance we could do it the afternoon of the 19th? I appreciate it's after a committee meeting, effectively, but that might be helpful. It's a free afternoon that afternoon, and then it would stop it being in the school holidays.
We've avoided obviously having any meetings in the mornings because of group meetings. Holding a council meeting on the same day as any other meeting other than Welsh Church because of the group meetings in the morning. Obviously, if it's in the chamber's booked for the group meeting, so we try and move the select around. Again, I'm happy to have a look at it to see if we can do, but that's why we wouldn't have held it on the same day.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Yes, Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. Would this be an appropriate time to mention the fact that sometimes meetings are called at short notice? I appreciate that there's often a need for that, but it would be helpful if meetings weren't, changed once they're set in the calendar, because it when we diarise our meetings, I know a lot of people then cannot make alternative plans to rearrange their diaries. So I think, if that could be common practice through the year to avoid as many changes to these dates as possible. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. There's a couple of papers, I guess, which are a classic Democratic Services Committee territory before you today. The first of these on governance and decision making. So just a bit of background. You'll see in Para 2.1 of the report there. Just as you're aware, this committee's got a remit to review and keep an eye on the adequacy of the arrangements in place around democratic services functions. And I put this on the agenda today because, as you're aware, there have been a number of changes of late, sort of coming back to September time, to the report writing template and approach, and also an opportunity to cite members on a piece of work that was carried out by Wales Audit Office, part of a national study fairly recently, looking at governance arrangements within local authorities. And they identified a number of issues nationally, which are highlighted there within the report. So I've brought these together as an opportunity to get your views as a committee as to whether those changes to the report writing template, and just as a reminder, what we've done is it now has a section for options appraisals for when decisions go forward. It has the clearer expectation that the section on consultees, rather than just simply listing consultees, gives you as members a much clearer idea of what's changed in reports as a result of consultation. And that also reports are expected to be far more explicit in terms of evaluation, setting out how things will be evaluated in future. And of course, what that means in terms of scrutiny is that the decision-making body, and depending on what it is, be that council or cabinet, would have the opportunity to look at that at a future date and to take a judgment on whether that decision has been effectively implemented and achieved what the decision-making body expected it to do. And of course, what that does throw up for all of our committees is the ability to add any of those items onto its work programme, should it fit within the remit of the committee and what they're setting out to do. So it was really the opportunity for a little bit of discussion and to get some feedback from yourselves as members broadly on the quality of the reports that you're receiving through from officers, and whether those changes to the report template, in terms of what you're examining, are achieving what they set out to do. Because what I'd like to do, if we need to make some changes, is to revisit that and to understand whether we need to be doing more work with officers and to ensure that those reports are giving members the information you need in order to take decisions effectively. Just to sort of draw your attention to a couple of the broader issues there. The Wales Audit Office report is referred to in para 4.4 of this work. So a while back they carried out a local study on governance, and you'll see a conclusion there that the council has clear strategic approach for The council has a clear strategic approach for significant service changes, although better information would help members when deciding the future shape of the council. And they went on to list a number of specific reports. So, updating the constitution, which has now happened, improving the quality of options appraisals, which we made those changes to the report template to include that to address, ensuring that service change reports better reflect stakeholder views. So you should be seeing in that consultation far greater clarity on what's changed as a result. Setting out at the point of decision making how the impact is going to be measured and monitored, which we try to do by incorporating the options evaluation stage, and also keeping decision making under review, which of course is within the remit of this committee to understand actually and to take that view on whether our decision making arrangements are effective. So coming back to you as a committee to say, well, this is what Wales Audit Office said about us. There was a national study which reported broadly in the same areas, and to ask you as members to take a judgment and have a broad discussion on that area. So Chair, with your permission, over to members.
Members, you've heard what's been said. Have you got any questions or any queries? Councillor Elwood.
Thank you, Chair. At this stage, I've heard in select committee meetings very often it would be useful to have a summary of some of the more lengthy reports. I appreciate that might take a bit more work, but it would be very helpful if that could be considered.
Yeah, I think one of the things we have to be mindful of this is as to who would be summarising those reports, because I don't think it would be something we could reasonably ask of our colleagues in democratic services nor of scrutiny, because they're not the experts of that. I think what we need to do, and this is the issue, I guess, if you're receiving reports that are not worded in such a way that enable you to easily and quickly understand the key points, we have a problem with the quality of reports that we as officers are giving to you. And I think what I'm mindful of is accepting the recommendations, and perhaps it's one for discussion, let's expand this point. What I'd be not looking to do is set up a whole additional set of processes where people are doing another template to summarise the report. What I would like to see is people write reports that are effective enough and get the issues across with sufficient clarity that you don't need summaries of those reports. There may be other views.
Councillor Elwood first.
I agree with what you have said in the sense that reports need to be clear and concise and in effect to sum up the position, because in many of the areas, scrutiny committees, they're not expert in that area, and therefore it should be written in such a way that your average lay person can access it and can gain the main gist of the report and be able to make a sensible and sound decision. So I think, clarity of the report is utmost, and the fact that they shouldn't really be too lengthy where possible, because it is difficult, as a councillor colleague Sheila Wood has said behind me, it's difficult sometimes ploughing through a very long report to try and gain the main gist of it. But I agree with your point. I think clarity of report writing is paramount in terms of scrutiny committees reading them, or full council, and being able to make a sound and sensible decision on the basis of that report.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. I was replying to an email and I forgot where I was going. paragraph 4.8, and I know I'm going to sound like a crack record here. It's very difficult for me, and I dare say other working members, to attend the workshops that have been held. They would have been extremely useful, but as far as I'm aware, only one was rescheduled for a 4 p.m. start time, and that was modern local government, or modernising local government, the one with Ian Bottrill. But for most of them, I mean, I don't know how other members are placed, but throughout the year I can take up to 19 days worth of civic duty leave, and I peg those out very clearly for the meetings I have to attend, for council planning, this committee and public services committee. So anything else is pretty much a bonus, or I have to take leave, which is a little bit annoying. And I just wish, I don't expect all of them to be at times that aren't going to suit every member, but they all seem to be at 10 o'clock and 2 o'clock. And as I've said before, and I'll keep on saying because I'm blue in the face, 10 o'clock is the very worst of times, because it wastes the 2 hours in the morning that I could be at work and getting a couple of hours in. So that's the first thing. And touching on the options appraisal, great. I understand that the need maybe to explain a slightly wider picture so members can understand why a particular route is being proposed. But I do think there's also an onus on members who are part of a particular committee or have an interest for them to find out or to do their own research and not rely on everything being placed in front of them to save them the bother.
Councillor Hawkins.
Thank you. Mine's just a very small point. Acronyms. I have an awful lot of acronyms, in particular in social services and in education, and sometimes you can spend quite a long time thinking through all the various permutations, and it would be very useful if the acronyms were normally spelt out.
Do you want to come back in? No one.
Thank you. I think that's a very helpful point, and I know that one I've personally been picked up on over the years, and it's absolutely right. I think some of the points I'm hearing here, it's really important for us, because I can't remember, so it's quite a well-known quote, I can't remember who it's attributed now, but it's along the lines of, I wrote you a long letter because I didn't have time to write you a short one. As officers, it's often quite easy for us to sort of blurt out all our knowledge and put everything down and resort to the acronyms and the jargon, but we do have to remember, and it's important in my role and for John and his team and Cal and all of us, that we are constantly reminding our colleagues amongst officers that not only are we writing for you as elected members, this is about openness and transparency, and we're writing for members of the public. We immerse ourselves in our topics, we feel we know them inside out, and it's not our job to show off, it's our job to explain those concepts so that everyone in our community can understand them. That's what we're working towards. And what I would ask, I've had some examples today, but please do feed them back to myself, to John, where you're finding, and if there are particular instances where certain departments or individuals, it doesn't have to be in an open forum, just drop us a note or have a word, because it is that feedback then that we can then speak to the individuals and the heads of service and the manager and work with the individuals. And if we find these are problems across the board, then often it's generic training and advice notes, but sometimes it can be specific areas. So actually, let's just make sure we're addressing this in the right way. But I certainly do recognise those comments, and thank you. We'll take those back and again, sort of remind people and look what we need to do to put those improvements in place. On the issue of the public summary, I know I've had two views. I'm guessing there may be more views amongst the committee. So if there are, whether it's today or otherwise, interested in getting that feedback. But one of the things I try and get colleagues to do within my own areas is when you're doing things, and when we do this on the hub, is to think in terms of sort of 3 chunks of information. I like to think, and I picked this up off a book once. What's the Twitter summary? Can you say it in 140 or I think now 280 characters? What's sort of the dinner party or the lift? If you had to blag something, how little could you get away with reading just to understand enough to have a conversation over a glass of wine in a dinner party? And actually, sometimes with our report writing, it's the same thing. You've got to think, if someone has a limited amount of time, could they pick this up from 2 or 3 key paragraphs within the report, with then some more detail elsewhere? And I think there's just a certain discipline in that, thinking, if I've only got 5 minutes, can I get it from this report?
Thank you, Chair. I didn't, but I'll take the opportunity. Now you've offered it me. God, how long have we known one another, David? No, the thing that really gets me with emails is a couple of things, really. How people will join in on an email, and that's officers as well as members, and it's the Me Too thing, which is almost like, I want to prove that I've read this, or I'm still alive, or something or other like that. That really gets me. The other thing is the cutting down, the sort of simple speech within writing the article. It's very often the case that you cut out information that is important to us, like if it's a committee or a company or something or other like that, you shorten the title down, and maybe we don't get that. So that makes it a problem for us to go and look and find out what company this is, or this is who we should be talking to, or whatever. The other thing, if it really galls me, is acronyms. I mean, the number of acronyms that are used are, well, blow my mind. So please don't use acronyms. I've got one that I use as a speciality when somebody annoys me, and I always say it's a KDRB or something or other like that, and I use it again, and I wait till somebody asks me what it is, and it means knock down and rebuild, and basically that is how I feel about some of the emails when you get all this. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So you'll take on board what's been said and take it back to the relevant officers? Yes. Right, thank you. Item 8, is that yours as well, Matt?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Sorry. This was just to bring back, I think, I suppose, in part, so you didn't feel I'd forgotten it in its entirety. Because it's something that's been a little bit quiet for a while. But if you think back at the start of the life of this committee, you received a few presentations on, I suppose, democracy in its broader sense, how we create more opportunities for people to engage with us as a local authority in different ways, to involve people in decision making. And I guess it's particularly timely at the moment when you think around the period we're entering. You know, as members or as a council, last time out you approved the corporate plan, which had previously been through Cabinet. And that set out quite an ambitious programme over the next 4.5 years. And I think we're probably all conscious that probably a lot of the changes that have happened in recent years are nothing compared to the sorts of pace of change and challenges which are going to be facing public services in the years to come. Monmouthshire Council, I think, in terms of things like efficiencies, has probably tackled most of the easier areas, and the decisions that come before you as members in future are probably going to be increasingly difficult and challenging to make, and some of the changes are going to be fairly far-reaching. And I guess we can expect far more interest from members of the public, but also we have to sort of understand moving forward that we won't have all of the ideas to the sorts of challenges we're facing, and there will be people in our communities with ideas and knowledge. And sometimes they'll come to you as their ward member and share that through yourselves, and sometimes you'll have that knowledge from groups within your communities. But we sort of set out a number of design principles within the corporate plan, and that was around sort of ensuring that we're open in decision-making, engagement, in how we evaluate performance, be held accountable for the things we do and the things we're not to do. So the corporate plan sets out, I guess, a number of areas were particularly pertinent to this committee, and they're captured in para 4.5 of this report: strengthening decision-making and accountability, reshaping governance arrangements, identifying ways to get more people involved in local democracy and scrutiny. So I just pause on that one, and I guess this is the issue behind this paper. We'd agreed at a previous meeting, and a number of you stepped forward to volunteer to form part of a small working group where we would look at a couple of particular topics and use those as pilots to involve the community in different ways. Now, because we had the corporate plan coming up and actually the sorts of big issues, we had a lot more evidence coming out. I guess I took my foot off the gas on that one a little bit, and I think now that we have this corporate plan agreed, we have a clear understanding what Council has signed up to over the next 4.5 years, is the opportunity to bring that group together, to look at those issues and pick one or two of those and involve this committee in looking at new ways of involving people. So it's a bit of I suppose, a comma of a report, in that it's a slight pause and say, look, we've not taken this off the agenda. I'm going to be coming back to those of you that stepped forward at that meeting, and perhaps requesting a working group to start that piece of work and kick it off in earnest. So it was the opportunity to remind you of that, to say it's going to be coming back around, but also to ensure and draw out the key issues from the corporate plan, of particular resonance to this committee, to ensure that as we move forward, that you as a committee are helping to shape those particular aspects of that document, of that plan.
Thank you, Matt. And I'm glad you haven't forgot about the working group. Can I suggest that if there's anybody interested in being part of that working group, that you come back to me, and then we can form it, and we can go back to Matt, and we can get the wheels moving. Right? Is members' IT issues? I think that's John.
Just following on from previous meetings we've had, really, around IT support and things like that. We put a survey on the hub and we sent it through to all members to give us some feedback on IT issues, training, things like that. We took the opportunity to ask a few questions. Not a massive response, unfortunately, but overall the responses we had in said that you're happy with the equipment, but you would like further training on it in areas such as Skype, Mon Maps, the telephone and things like that. So we'll look to encompass some training sessions around meetings and things like that, see if we can get some more information on the hub for you that way. Mobile phones, we put the question on there. It was split down the middle. Some say yes, some say no. So nothing really definitive there on the previous issue of mobile phones and whether we should be issuing those out to members. Support from Democratic Services and SRS you were happy with, and we also had quite a few feedback responses on contact information. We spoke before about trying to get easy accessible numbers for departments and officers. We said if we can narrow it down to 20 or 30 services you most commonly use or need when people you're out and about in your ward, we'll try and just devise something up along those lines, which we've had feedback on the departments you want, so we'll look to put something together and email that out to everybody. And as far as I'm aware, we haven't had many IT issues in the last couple of weeks. So I've cursed it now. But generally, obviously more training in some of the functionality of the equipment is needed, so we'll put that together. But any other comments from members on their IT recently? Any issues?
Any questions to John? No? Yes, Joe.
Just then to clarify, you said it was split down the middle in terms of the mobile phone question. So what's going to be the next step that's happening with regard to that?
There's no budget for it. I think the best thing for us to look at initially is, as part of these training sessions, if we can train everybody up in using the phones on their tablets and seeing how effective they are, then we've got something to base that off, whether they're useful or not. I mean, the other thing we could possibly look at is, the issue with that is if you haven't got an internet connection, you can't use the phone. So is a cheaper option or a better option to get you a dongle for your tablets, so you've always got an internet connection, depending on the area, obviously. That's another option to look at, so you've got emails and everything else all there. So I think we'll do the training on the telephones first, and then we'll look at everything off the back of that then later on.
Councillor Wood.
Interesting what you're saying about using the phone on your tablet, because I've noticed I don't use my tablet to go onto public Wi-Fi because it doesn't let me in, to be honest. I think the security is so good on it. It's only sort of in private places that we can actually use these. So would it not be the same with the dongle, that we wouldn't be allowed to get onto a public Wi-Fi?
No, it would. The dongle would pretty much just be like accessing your internet at home, and it's only restricted in. Do you mean the MCC public Wi-Fi? Is because there is an issue with connecting to that, but you don't need access to it because it automatically connects to the main network without going through the public. But otherwise, it should just be fine to connect up to any Wi-Fi network. Corporate ones can have issues. But say you were in the one-stop shop, you could connect to the network as you do in here without the need to go through any public Wi-Fi. So if you want to give me some examples of where you're having trouble connecting, then we can have a look at it. But otherwise, it shouldn't be a problem. It's just the same as connecting to your network at home.
I think that's just reinforced the need for some workshops. So yes, please.
Councillor Thomas.
I've got sort of an issue of where I live, and we've got such poor broadband connection. You know, it's less than a megabyte, and it is really hampering me, to be honest, with the use. You know, the surface, nothing wrong with the machine, but I have huge difficulties, and I don't know what either I can do or MCC can do about that. And it's not the fault of the machine or the backup, but really it's having quite a serious effect on my efficiency as a councillor, really, to be able to go into the MCC areas, etc. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't, and in responding to emails. But I've raised this issue about mobile phones before. I don't particularly want to give out my mobile phone number, my personal mobile phone number. Generally, I give out my house number. People are obviously welcome to ring, but obviously sometimes I'm not there. I feel quite strongly that we should have a mobile phone to use for sort of work purposes, because if you're talking about sort of greater contact with people in our ward and responding to them effectively, it's quite difficult if you're out walking in the ward to use the phone on this. It's not a simple thing to be carrying about with you. When I worked before, then obviously I had a Works BlackBerry to start with, then a mobile, so that you could be in fairly good contact. And I do think it's quite an important issue myself. I mean, I don't know how other people think about that, because it is part of your work kit, if you like. And yes, the phone on this is okay if you're at home and if you've got good connection. But if you're out and about on the ward, etc., you can't go dragging this or opening this up and saying, I'm going to go on my phone. So I do feel quite strongly with that, but I'd be interested to find out how other members feel about the mobile phone issue.
Perhaps it's worth trialling you with the dongle then, just as an example, because your issue about having connection doesn't just sit with the internet, it's going to sit with a mobile phone. We might get a corporate contract for 43 mobile phones for your councillors, but what works down in Mega isn't going to work up in Abergavenny necessarily, or give you good enough network coverage in your ward. So there's all those sorts of things we've got to balance off as well. a way we could look at doing it is we'll refund a pay-as-you-go monthly, £10 a month, because that's all you effectively need. You can get a pay-as-you-go SIM card for £10, unlimited minutes, whatever. And all you've got to do is sort the handsets out yourself. That could be one option, but you're having the ability then to utilise what's best for your area where you're living, rather than us giving you something that isn't going to work. So we've got all those sorts of things to think about as well. But perhaps for now, if we can get you a dongle that helps you use that at home better, it might be an option we can start looking at then.
Councillor Easton.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you. I wasn't going to speak, but this is important. There is a way and means of connecting to your mobile phone without people knowing your mobile phone number, and I think that should be followed up by Democratic Services for each member to have a 644 number, which when it's rung, that's your public number. When it's rung, it automatically connects to your mobile phone number.
Kind of. You can. You can, but the cost of forwarding that phone call from a 644 extension number to a mobile is more expensive than just having a mobile. So is granted, yes, but there's other ways around it as well.
It is an issue which people have. In Newport, they've stopped taking your public phone number off the website. If they want to contact a council in Newport, you've got to contact Newport City Council now. Whereas, yes, we do get sometimes abusive phone calls.
Councillor Thomas.
I'm sorry to come back, but I think as well it's a cost. When I in my former employment, if I was having to ring somebody who's out on the road, they didn't expect me to use my own personal phone and cost, for that. And the same token, if you're at home, sometimes you've got to use your own personal landline to ring people in your ward, and obviously that is racking up your bill. But it is in connection with your work. It's not a phone call to your auntie in Abertillery. It's phoning somebody in the ward, and I think that's a bit of an issue. It's very difficult. You're not going to go claim all those little calls back, but it does rack up really, and it is in connection with being a councillor. It's not a social thing.
Anybody else? Any comments? Can we leave it with you and John to sort out these workshops and to come back with what's been said here this afternoon? Thank you.
I was looking at the printed reports and missed item 10 off. I'm not aware that we have any particular items coming forward in terms of the coordinating role as such. One thing I did want to cite members on under this particular item, and it's just potentially where there's, I guess, I wouldn't call it an overlap, but where Audit Committee currently does something that's of interest to this committee. And what I wouldn't like to do is bring you the same information that Audit Committee have and have you duplicating that work. But there are a number of areas where Audit Committee receives reports that have been written by external bodies, such as the Wales Audit Office. And actually the National Report on Decision Making and Governance was one such report. So Audit Committee have the role of overseeing the effectiveness of our improvement arrangements. But actually there are reports that come forward that Audit Committee look at that have points of detail in them that may be relevant for other committees. Now, historically, in a number of years back, this council had that coordinating board as a separate function. And it would say, we've seen this, we feel this fits within the remit of children and young people or adult select committee. And my understanding being, as things stand, in terms of this committee sort of picking up that coordinating role, where there is a decision on whether things need to go in a certain direction, that's something you can take a judgment on as a committee. So I guess it's one for you, as whether as members of this committee you would like to be cited on the detail of those reports that go to Audit Committee that might have recommendations for other committees to take a view, or are you happy for us as officers to make that judgment and for Audit Committee to refer those on as as necessary. So probably an example might be, there's a national study on procurement, and it might come up with 5 or 6 recommendations at a national level. Now, they may be not relevant to Monmouthshire. It might be 1 or 2 of those issues are relevant to Monmouthshire. Is that something that you as a committee wish to be cited on, or are you happy for that to remain with Audit Committee?
Members, any questions? Council.
I'm actually a member of the Audit Committee, so I'd be quite comfortable with that being forwarded if it was the officers think it's necessary to come to this committee.
Anybody else? Councillor Watkins.
Again, I'm also sit on audit. I don't particularly feel the need to see the same reports that I would see in audit in the context of democratic services. I'm actually quite confident that the members of the audit committee have a decent breadth of perspective, that if an officer flagged it up that it would need to go to another committee, then that would be fine, and audit's probably a good enough catch just to make sure that nothing gets missed.
Councillor Derby.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'd be quite happy for that to go ahead, because obviously you would be sending me something that you believe I should be reading anyway. And the other point is that even if I get it separately, it doesn't really matter too much. The point is I shouldn't lose it, if you like, so I'd be quite happy for that to go ahead.
Sorry, can I just clarify, Councillor, in terms of going ahead, do you mean to go ahead that it remains as an audit committee responsibility, or that you receive it as a member of this committee? Okay.
Anybody else?
So if I can just sort of play that back. So what we'll do then, I mean, I guess it's a narrow margin of 2 against 1 based on the contributions so far. But what we do is I wouldn't expect that these items would necessarily be discussed at this committee, or it occupies airtime. Just that we, when those are available, we cite you on them. So it would be a for information item. But that we would leave the remit of making that sort of formal decision as to whether it gets referred on with Audit Committee. Would that be okay?
You all happy with what Matt just said? Right. Thank you. Can we go on to item 11, please? It's the local development plan, community involvement.
Thanks, Chair. I'll try and make this short and sweet. Without wishing to prejudge any discussion that happened next Monday, we're bringing a report to Council on 19th of March, seeking an agreement from Council to start work on a brand new LDP. So I don't want to get into a discussion about that, but hopefully you're familiar. The local development plan, the purpose of that is to set out the land use planning framework for the county going forward. And it's one of the tools the council has for delivering its vision of building sustainable and resilient communities for the well-being of current and future generations, as set out in the business plan. So if that decision were to take place, one of the first steps and one of the other recommendations to council is endorsement of the delivery agreement. So the purpose of the report before you today is to ask for your comments if there's any suggested changes or additions or alterations to the delivery agreement, which is part of the local development plan. There's 2 parts to the delivery agreement. The first part is essentially a timetable that sets out when the key parts of the project would happen. Obviously, this is all assuming that council approval is given next Monday. If it doesn't, this becomes entirely irrelevant. The second part relates to a community involvement scheme. And it's probably in particular that second part we're interested in this committee's views on. If you think there are groups that are missing that we should be engaging with, other ways of engaging with communities, seldom heard voices, and indeed yourselves as members, as county councillors, how we can best involve you. Hopefully, as you'll be aware, it is an important document for the council. It's an important document for our communities in setting out the future and how it affects them. So we want to engage with them as best as we possibly can. We quite often hear two voices quite loudly, namely people objecting to development and house builders or landowners who want their sites promoted. There's an awful lot of other people that we never really hear from, and we want to try and hear from. So we list some of those in the section of the community involvement scheme that sets out hard to reach groups, or there's a little paragraph underneath that, what we're terming seldom heard voices. So for example, people waiting for affordable housing, small and medium enterprises or businesses, some of those other groups that we never really quite hear from, which might be because they're happy, might be because they think it's irrelevant to them, or they're blissfully unaware. But we would like to hear from them more. So having had a brief meeting with Councillor Sarah Jones as Cabinet Member, who looks at democracy and community engagement and social justice, I forget the exact title, apologies Councillor, but from that discussion we agreed it'd be worthwhile hearing this committee's thoughts on those proposals. And unfortunately, we had two choices really. One was to bring it now in advance of council's decision, but at the earliest stage, or the other one, your next meeting, which is precious close to the end of the consultation on this document, if council does approve it next week. So we've gone for the former. Hopefully it isn't wasted time or effort talking about it now. But if you have any comments on shaping that community involvement scheme in particular, how, when, why we involve communities, any groups you think are missing, or other ways of doing things better, we'd be really keen to hear from you. We are, of course, having to be mindful of how it fits into the timetable, which itself is relatively tight, and there's reasons for that set out in the council papers in terms of us needing to have a plan in place as soon as possible to the 1st of January 2022, so we make sure we still have planned coverage. That's probably all I need to say for now, Chair. I'm happy to take any questions, but if this committee has any comments on that community involvement scheme or the timetable, then we'd be pleased to hear them.
Thank you, Matt. Any questions? It is a very important document, and the last time this came in front of us, we spent long hours down in Caldicott Leisure Centre, and the way you've done it now this time, you've broke it up and it's made it easier for members to concentrate on. So it's over to yourselves to have your say, and put your concerns or thoughts to them, so they can go back and work on it.
Thank you, Chair. As this is the first time I've been involved in this process, it's a very, very useful piece of information that we can use to refer to with regard to engagement. It's also useful to see that you've covered the fact that people who may wish to have it paper copy can be accommodated, given if it's necessary. Obviously, we'll be able to forward all this on. Any information on electronically ourselves. How does the community engagement, is it possible to say how this is going to differ from what was happened last time? Summary of that.
Do you mean, through the Chair, do you mean in terms of methods of engagement, or perhaps some of the content of it?
Sorry, method of engagement.
If I pick up, Chair, on a couple of points, I wasn't actually here myself for last time, so I'm on the best place to answer some of that. There are some things we picked up on, though, that we do believe need to be done or should be done differently. In terms of engaging with yourselves as county councillors, I think we're conscious that in the last plan there were some key stages perhaps considered by Cabinet, and then the really big decisions brought to council. And for some members, unless they were involved from a ward perspective, that was maybe the first input or real look they'd had. So one of the ideas we're discussing is having some kind of member steering group working on the LDP. I don't know yet whether that would be via an existing select committee or other committee or a new group. I'm conscious of your time demands as well. But we quite like to do that. So have, you know, a mix of councillors helping us work through some of the topics. There might even be some bespoke pieces of work. For example, Gypsy Traveller Sites is quite a demanding piece of work in its own right. And it might be Adult Select Committee, for example, is asked to do that bit of work to feed in. So some work with county councillors would like to do differently. I think we're aware, or on reflection, it feels a bit like with the previous plan. When we went to the communities at some of the key stages, it was essentially this is what we need in, for example, Abergavenny, and this is the suggested site or sites. What do you think? Rather than this is the growth that we need in Abergavenny. These are the options that have come forward. You know, what do you think of the options? Which do you think are the best or the least bad? So I think we probably think on reflection that it was really being presented as this is the suggested solution, yes or no, rather than maybe a bit more freedom to give other thoughts. So we want to address that through the way we're working. One of the challenges we always face, and I'm not quite sure how we crack, is there is community engagement or stakeholder engagement at the outset when we're looking at the strategy and the growth options. But quite often what happens is no one's terribly interested or involved in that until it affects a bit of land near their home. So we need to try and get a bit more interest where we can in that stage and understanding. I mean, if people choose not to be involved, then that's up to them. We can't be on that, but hopefully explain to them why it is relevant. And we're talking a little bit about whether there's scope when we have an idea of how the growth strategy might pan out. If there's areas that are particularly affected, for example, at the moment development's focused on the main towns, then we could have some more targeted work with, you know, a cluster of county and town and community councils around those main towns. If again that's an area that's mostly affected, or some targeted policy work. So at the moment we have a policy that relates to affordable housing sites and main villages. So we could do some of that work with those communities affected in a more targeted way. So I think that probably the key things we've identified we'd look to do differently compared to last time. I mean, the actual content of what we're consulting on, that's very much to be shaped and to come. And I think that in itself will probably mean we need to be a bit fluid about how we're consulting with people. Is there anything else, Sarah?
Well, as Mark said, we've got some of the hard to reach groups that are listed. So we're looking to try and involve younger people as well, which we didn't do previously. So we're looking to utilise the Engage to Change group as one of them. We also, social media, we only had the website previously. We've got Twitter now. We'll probably use the corporate page as well as our own page. We've spoken to the comms team about that. And also Facebook. And then we will do the usual workshops, drop-in sessions, exhibitions, things like that we did previously. But as Mark said, we'll try and engage a wider spectrum of people throughout that. And also the cluster meetings as well. We didn't have those in place previously. And they can obviously filter information down as well then.
Councillor Watkins.
I was about to commend you on your desire to engage with the young people, because obviously a lot of those young people we want to buy houses as they kind of reach the sort of age in which we're probably talking about these houses actually being built. Have you thought about actually going into the schools as well and actually directly dealing with some sort of level within the comp system and actually talking to the young people in the comps?
Yes, Chair. At this stage, it is just a thought, but we're keen to do that. There's probably some fairly easy ways it could tie in with the geography or maybe sociology type curriculums anyway. So yeah, we'd be keen to do that, get into the schools and explain a little bit about, you know, what this is, how it could affect them. Interestingly, there's a recent competition for a thought piece by a young planner, and the winner lives in Usk, was writing about Usk, goes to Kylie and Comp. So it's interesting that there is talk about this kind of topic. But if we could get in there to speak to the young people in the schools through existing sort of pathways, then we can get the message out a bit further.
Councillor Howarth.
Thanks, Chair. Howard, don't confuse me with my northern brother. Thanks, Chair. Just one thing, well, a couple of things. The call for candidate sites and the draft preferred strategy, that one's a little bit chicken and egg to me. And I note on the timetable that the strategy is going to be reported to council before the consultation takes place. And I just wondered, I think that's identified for maybe November of this year. And I thought, well, at that point, what exactly are you going to seek council's view on to then present to members of the public? And I'm always mindful of the fait accompli thing and going to a meeting and where you've already told us we're choosing 3 options and we haven't had any input into what those options might be, that sort of thing. Reference in the report to the use of Monmouthshire Made Open, it's not a criticism of the platform or the motivation behind it, but I had a look on there within the last week and saw what I compared with other social media outlets, very little activity from a handful of people, and I don't think that's the right vehicle to use at this stage to try and engage people through IT. I wondered maybe, okay, I note this of the planning Twitter account, which I follow. It's not always used an awful lot, but I wonder if it might be better having an LDP Facebook page that ought to be managed, because I know these things are onerous and you get hundreds of questions, that ought to be managed by a PR team rather than relying on somebody in the planning department. The hard to reach groups as well. I find this one a little bit, what's the word I'm looking for? Not necessarily an apt description, because to my mind, I think based on the previous experience where a lot of people spent hours attending meetings, I did attend the public sessions we had for the preferred strategy in Abergavenny well before the candidate sites came forward, or certainly well before the deposit stage, and there was good attendance there. And again, on the day never to be forgotten at County Hall, where we had loads of people from town and community councils, loads of residents turn up. We all sat there for 13 hours and there was no food to be had afterwards, that sort of thing. It was dreadful. All the effort people put in. And I'm trying to recall, I think barely anything changed from the start of the meeting to the end of the meeting in terms of what went forward for adoption. And again, once it had been inspected, there was very little difference between that and what council had approved. So to me, a hard to reach group is going to be a good number of people who spent so much time last time round and think it's highly worth bothering this time, because what they say doesn't make very much difference. And I know that's not necessarily our fault, or either as officers, as members, because of the external factors. And I think we do need to qualify how much or how little headroom we have with Welsh Government's expectations of the plan they want us to see and will consider sound. And the last point then, is there any scope, I know it's more of an English thing, but is there any scope to try something more like a neighbourhood plan approach in the timescale we have? Maybe just to pilot in 1 or 2 areas.
Thank you. Mark, do you want to come back in on that one?
Yeah, the call for candidate sites we've got down as July to October 2018, so it's sometime before the preferred strategy. There are different phases in assessment of the candidate sites that are set out in the timetable. The preferred strategy would identify the strategic areas of growth, but it wouldn't obviously pinpoint individual smaller sites. Prior to that, we'd have the options assessment and appraisal, which obviously would be a key stage of public consultation and engagement.
Just from the Welsh Government timetable?
No. Yeah, in terms of the way it's set out.
Sorry, Chair. We're just having a little clarification. We had the same conversation a couple of weeks ago about the timetable and where and why they sit so early. But I think part of it does come from the Welsh Government guidance booklet on the timetable, and we've checked with others, and this is because I was asking the same question, why we're asking for them at that stage when you haven't set out what your strategy is yet. I think the idea is to ask the question, and that work comes in, and we simultaneously do some work on the strategy and the options, while also sifting through some of those sites. One thing to point out with the candidate sites is going to be probably more involved this time round, because the Welsh Government's very clear about us having to understand the viability and deliverability of proposals coming forward, to try and overcome some of the issues everyone's faced in their plans, with sites being allocated but they're not coming forward, or it's not getting the infrastructure that we thought we were going to get. I mean, you may not have too much sympathy, but it costs landowners or site promoters, tens to hundreds of thousands to promote some of these sites. So we only want to ask for that detailed viability work at a later stage if the site's likely to go anywhere. We'll have people putting in sites in floodplains, for example. So if they're just a non-starter and we can knock them out from the outset, there's no point in them spending money unless they stubbornly insist that they want to keep promoting it. There's no point in asking us for all that extra detailed work if it's a non-starter. So we're going to do that in various stage processes. The actual proper consideration by council of those candidate sites will be later on than the strategy. But we did have the same question in the office about how does that relate? It seems a bit chicken and egg. So I suppose, I'm not sure if this was the purpose of your question, or it was certainly a question I was asking. But it isn't so that we write the strategy based on what we think is out there. It's just so those two bits of work are happening simultaneously. Does that make sense? The other questions you asked about, well, in terms of Monmouthshire Made Open, we'll note your comments on that. The reason we're suggesting having our separate planning Twitter account is, although it's only got a small number of followers, it will be people who are specifically interested in that topic, so we can go out to a wider audience with the MCC Twitter account, which we will use, but potentially there'll be so much other stuff tweeted that for those just interested in the LDP or primarily interested, they might miss it. So we were going to do both. We can have a look at the Facebook, see if it's worth us setting up some kind of bespoke page for that topic, and also have a word with comms and see if they're happy managing that, because that will certainly help us out. And I made a note to myself about catering for the meeting. I'll see what I can do on that.
Matt wants to come in a minute.
Come back on that. Yeah, the chicken and egg thing. I wasn't trying to be an awkward question. I think it's just the feeling of well, if you have say in the south of the county and lots of candidate sites come forward and they all look reasonable. I know there aren't any reasonably straightforward sites because they've been done years ago, but the least awful ones come forward and you think, well, great, that's almost dealing with the issue, and it might not deal with necessarily. Deal with the spatial part of it, and what I'd be concerned about is say an influx of candidate sites in one area, giving the strategy weight that it might not deserve. But and the other point, yeah, with the Facebook page, and I should have said first time round, I found with Costain and the A465 Facebook page they've been running, that's been really useful. It's engaged an awful lot of people. They're quick to come back and answer questions. Okay, they do get abuse there, as you might on any sort of social media account, but generally it's used for sensible purposes and it's up to date, and I think it's been well regarded despite the problems with the road.
Yeah, it was only just to come in on the subject of Made Open, because that sort of sits within my area, and be remiss of me not to say anything at all, and absolutely recognising Councillor Howard's point. It's not something that has an extensive number of users or activities, and it's certainly not something I would advocate as an instead of, but in much the same vein, actually, it is a little bit chicken and egg. I think we leave it running, we put those things on there, and it is a place where I think we can start to build some community activism. But if we can get more people contributing to it, then it means when we do put those ideas out there, they're there as users. But absolutely recognise Councillor Howard's point. It wouldn't work if you just had it there. It wouldn't go to enough people to be effective. It is about using this range of channels, because everyone gets their information somewhere, and actually that's in a lot of different places. So it's about, with community engagement, maximising the number of channels and making sure that we're there for people however they choose to engage with us.
Yes, Chair. At the moment, we are minded to use the cluster areas and then Brunacombe Area Committee, because I think that's the current operating model. It would really help us if we can use that, partly because it does create kind of a bit of a coordinated area focus. So we could have a look at the whole Abergavenny Brunacombe area, for example, to pick on that area again. Sorry, Councillor Woodhouse. And Councillor Thomas. We could have a bit of a coordinated look at that, but also helps us with resources, because we can't go out to 30 odd meetings and repeat the same thing. It just isn't really possible. So if we can do it in a more coordinated fashion, it would help us. It might well be they have to have some kind of special or extra meeting with a wider audience than usual, but if it's used as a basis, that group, that could really help us out. And hopefully help them as well. So I just realised Councillor Giles did ask, Councillor Howard did ask a further question about neighbourhood plans. I knew something I've forgotten to answer. I think we'd struggle in terms of having it done in that way as a proper part of the plan, if you like, by the time that's resourced and that's in place. But the concept of getting a bit of bottom up, this is what this particular part of the county needs or needs to deliver. Not necessarily what they want. How can it best be done? Then certainly that's a concept we'd like to try and get to. So I think that's what we're aiming for with going out to these areas with options about sites, options plural, not just one yes or no, when no isn't particularly an option anyway. That's what we'd like to get from them. And also understanding some of the infrastructure needs they recognise, getting that input in. Because they'll know better than we will what they think is currently an issue and what they think is needed coming forwards.
Thank you, Matt. Councillor Jones, would you like to come back in on what's been said here this afternoon?
Only to say that when I had the discussion with Sarah and Mark, I thought, the plan that's in front of us is very comprehensive. There's a real willingness and desire to want to engage as far and as widely as possible. And I think we've all got a role to play as that in terms of elected members and community representatives. So it's an ongoing process, and I think we've always got a role in that. So I welcome the report that's in front of us without obviously prejudicing what the outcome of Monday will be. But let's all get involved in this and make sure that we consult with our communities as wide as possible.
Thank you. Any other questions to Mark? No? No? Right. What is it?
Just for information.
That's for information. And then scrutiny forward work plan, that was going to be Kelly's. And then note the time and date of the next meeting, which is the 23rd of April at 2 o'clock. Can I thank you all very much for your time, and the officers as well. And a safe journey home.